Hey everybody, this is Enlightener, and this is the first episode, I guess not episode, but part of a series maybe, of Starcraft Mythbusters. Right now I'm building my base and it's very noisy, so might want to turn down the volume settings in a bit. But I'm just building every type of building that I can. And I'm going to be showing you guys some myths about the Protoss. I don't know exactly how many there are, but hopefully I can cram them all into one video. If not, I'll make a part 2, or maybe even a part 3, since this was an hour long, and I was doing a bunch of little things, so we'll see. So, yeah, I hope you guys enjoy. This myth is the myth that a Colossi can be put into a warp prism and carried around. You can do this with medevacs and Thors, but I've never seen somebody do it with a Colossus and a warp prism, so that's the first thing I tried. Let's see how it happens. So yes, indeed, you can pick up a Colossus in a warp prism. Okay, so this next one is, if you go into transportation mode while a unit is warping in, the warp prism will automatically cancel that and give you a refund. So I'm going to warp in a sentry. Should take 100 gas, and should refund it if this all goes right. So we'll see. Warp in the sentry. Cancelled, and refunded it. Let's try it again. 100 loss. Cancels. It's refunded. So yes, indeed, that does happen. The other thing I tried was instantly going into warp mode and trying to warp in a unit, and that also works. This next one is to see if you can put a force field with sentries right on top of a Colossus, because Colossus supposedly can walk over them, which you'll find out later. And if you put a force field directly on a Colossus, we'll see what happens. So take the force field. And they actually instantly vanish. The next one is to see if you warp in a unit and surround it with force fields, what will happen to that unit? Will it get cancelled? I don't know, pushed out? Will it disappear? Get stuck? This one is actually an interesting result. It actually pushes itself out as soon as it's finished, but it stays in that place while the force fields are going down. I thought that was actually kind of interesting, considering the fact that when you warp in units, they have to stay stationary, but I thought they would get stuck in the force field, but apparently not. The next myth is that if you move a unit onto a Colossus, will it go underneath it, or will it just go to the side of it, or if you do vice versa, where you move a Colossus and you click another unit to move, what will happen? This was actually interesting in my opinion, because take the Immortal, it moves up to Colossus but doesn't go under it. You take the Colossus, see, the Immortal can't actually go under it, doesn't look like it. Take the Colossus, you can move it over it, but when you click on the Immortal, it doesn't do it. Now, what I found really interesting, if you select both of them, which you'll see in a second, select both of them and click on one place, they actually move in the same spot. And when you move them, they move together. So you can actually have a little Immortal and a Colossi, or I keep saying that, and a Colossus moving around together as like almost one unit, which is kind of interesting if you think about it. This next one is to see if a Colossus can walk over force fields. So I'm going to make a straight line of them, and then try to use the Colossus to move over, and throw in the Immortal just to see what happens. So grab the Colossus and the Mortal. And the Mortal can't go through. The Colossus actually steps on each one of them and breaks them. So Colossus will actually break force fields. You might already know that, but something I didn't know. This next one's a little subtle, and you might have to do it on your own in order to really understand the full effect of it. But basically we're testing to see if a Colossus can make a triangle or whatever shaped patrol under itself. So it'll just move back and forth in that patrol. And I actually found out that you can move them around in that area, but when you try to put a patrol, it doesn't actually set a waypoint unless it's outside of his hitbox. So yeah, you actually cannot put a patrol right under the Colossus, which I thought was kind of interesting. You can't put it right outside the edge though. So I guess that kind of makes sense. It's just such a big unit. This next one is to see if you can warp in units and then set their waypoints to a warp prism to see if the warp prism will actually collect it right after they're done. So you put all these zealots here. I don't know why one just evaporated. The waypoints actually move straight onto it. So yeah, if you warp in units and set waypoints to a warp prism, they actually will load into it without you having to do anything else. This one is to see if you can actually block the mineral line so the probes can't get to it, which could be an interesting strategy if you have enough sentries and you just have tons of energy. So we'll see what happens here. Sorry, it's a little bit loud. So if you look at the probes here, they're trying to get the minerals, but they're actually stuck. They can't. Excuse me. Found that kind of interesting. They won't actually go around, they'll just sit there. So it could be used as a strategy. I mean, only 2 of them went around. But I don't see many people using it as a strategy. Maybe if you put on the mineral itself, right in the middle of it, it can't get it from any side, so you could actually halt production if you have lots of sentries and you don't really feel like pushing in all the way. But it also can be used on buildings. That's what this is testing. There's actually a warp, not a warp, force field inside of that nexus. So that's the other thing I tested. If you really can't get to the mineral line, you can actually put force fields around the nexus. And the pros won't go around. They'll actually just sit there. Which is an interesting strategy because if you just put a few force fields here at the very early game, that stops production for quite a while. And there's not much your opponent can do about it except try to grab them, move them around, and by that time, if they try to move them around, maybe you can get a good shot at them. So, it does halt production. I don't know if it's worth it, but you guys can decide that. It's an interesting strategy, though. It also bunches them up, so if you have a Colossi, and they're trying to go back to base, if your opponent doesn't realize this, you put those force fields down, they'll all bunch up right in that area, Hellions, something. I guess if you're doing 2v2. And yeah, they'll actually bunch up there, and you can just fry them all. So, yeah. Interesting strategy if you ask me, but you probably won't see it around much. Okay, here we're going to see if these sentries can actually surround themselves and encase themselves in force fields. And we'll see if they get pushed out, if there's all force fields all around them, or they'll actually get stuck inside the force fields. it turns out they'll actually get stuck inside, and they can't move. There's one over here that's just completely stationary. They all bunched up, too. This looks actually kind of cool. You'll see them fan out. There you go. So yes, you can actually stick units in force fields and make them not be able to move at all. Very good tactic if you can do it right and do it quick enough. If you want to just mass a bunch of guys into one big blob and then fry them with AoE. Problem about that is, well, the good thing about it is that it's probably the only way to do something like that anymore, since they made any units going into a black hole, they made those units from the mothership, will exit with like 1.5 seconds of immortality, I think. So yeah, you can't actually do the Archon Flush or whatever it's called and take a bunch of Archons, stick them in with a bunch of other units, have them all come out AoE every single unit in one shot. So kind of sucks, but it's also it was really cool to see, but probably not very fair. This one's to see if Zealots can actually charge their own friendly units by just doing attack, you know, A, click, and oops, the results were interesting, but not surprising. If you just do attack move onto another unit, they won't actually do it, but if you click charge, you actually physically click charge or, you know, use hotkey C while they're attack moving, they'll actually charge up to that unit. But you have to click it. This next one is to see if you have a warp prism filled with units and it gets killed, if the units, while it's in warp mode, if the units will still drop or they'll actually just die. So get some Zealots in here, move it to transport mode, move them around, yada yada yada, but when you make it into phasing mode and you take, you know, sentries or something, if you kill it, no Zealots. Another interesting thing is you can actually hear the deaths of the Zealots inside of it. You could actually, I mean, if you can hear that split second, you hear like 4 Zealots dying. So that's also kind of interesting. So yeah, even if it's in phasing mode, those units get killed, it's fried. I guess it's kind of like dropping with the medevac. If you're dropping units and it gets killed, same thing. This next one's to see if you have a probe completely surrounded by buildings and it's stuck. If it tries to build a building in the exact space that it's in, will it get like pushed out, like kind of like the force fields? Will it get stuck right in the middle of it? Will it not be able to build it? So actually turns out if you build it, the probe gets pushed into a corner. And there's like, I don't know with other buildings, but with Nexuses, you actually have this little like area over here where it gets shoved into. They can't actually move out of that area, which is kind of interesting. The other thing I tried here was to see if I pumped lots of probes into a rally point inside, would the probes continuously go into there until they start pushing out from these edges? Would they stay in there and stack up? Results were somewhat interesting, actually. They'd get warped in here. Eventually, all of them, since they can't fit anymore, they get pushed out from the sides. They don't actually get pushed out, but they spawn on the outside. So see how they're spawning over here? I was killing here because I was full supply. But yeah, you actually... Apparently this is the maximum amount of probes that you can fit in one Nexus area, which is an awful lot if you look at it. 76, I believe. And yeah, that's a lot of probes. I don't know if you ever have that many in that tight space, but yeah, that's how that works. The other thing I tried here is to see if I could use force fields to push the probes out. turns out you actually can't. So, yeah, these probes are stuck here until one of these nexuses goes down. The other thing I tried is to see if I could build buildings in this area while the probes are there. And slow it down a bit. Interestingly enough, if you try to build a nexus here, whoa, you can't actually build it. But it'll try to do it for a while, and then say it can't place location. Can't place location invalid, sorry. So, yeah, you're not building any buildings in here with this many probes. Even a pylon, just it plain out can't fit. These probes are trying to cram themselves out, but it won't work. So this thing is to see if you can, by making hallucinations, to see if you can make hallucinations surround an area. Like if you keep constantly spawning them to just run out because of energy, or will actually have a limit to how far out they go. Also, surprisingly enough, 2 of the hallucinations get moved from outside into this little nexus trap, and you'll see that in a second. So yeah, if you take sentries and you just keep building hallucinations, they'll keep going outward. There's no end to really, but they do have boundaries, so like these colossi actually can't get in here, and these 2 can't get out. Kind of interesting, actually. What we're seeing here is taking a massive amount of probes, sticking them on one mineral line, getting them all minerals, but then setting a rally point while they're going from outside to the mineral line. See, if you set it while they're getting the minerals, or if they already have them, they'll move out, over here. But if you move them out and then send them in and then shift rally out to here and then shift stop, they actually will collect the minerals but not return them to a nexus. I don't know if it's really a myth. I guess the myth would be probes, as soon as they collect minerals, will return to a nexus no matter how many orders you give them in a waypoint, I guess. So these probes actually will not return to the nexus, come over here, and immediately stop. The other thing I've done in previous videos is, I guess just one, but when I masked probes, like 200 of them, if you look in my other videos, you can group them up on one mineral, but what was interesting here is since they all have minerals, they all want to go back to the nexus. If you keep clicking on the mineral, they'll stack up in a big bunch, and they'll keep trying to return the nexus. When you stop, they'll actually move as a giant bunch of probes and not disperse. They'll actually just stay in that big line, hit the nexus, return all the minerals, and then return as this kind of like slinky looking thing. If you'll watch here, they'll hit one mineral, then realize that's too much, move a lot of probes, almost like a slinky, moves to each different type, and spreads out evenly. It's kind of interesting, actually, but I guess that's maybe interesting to me, maybe not interesting to you guys. I thought that was kind of cool.